always intended to write a family story because I knew of the uniqueness kind of my background, in that my father, I knew, had been a Czech Jewish refugee in China, and that there he had met my mother, who was born in China of American missionaries, and they had a 60-year love affair and had many interesting stories to tell. So I always thought I would sit down and do that. But it was upon their deaths, they actually died within 2 days of each other in 2000, that we discovered a treasure trove of letters from World War II that my father had hid away after the war. And it was from that choice to take those letters and get them all translated, because they were written in Czech, and there were 400 of them by what turned out to be 78 writers, and even 70 carbon copied letters of my father's. So it was from that I really knew I had to write something more special, because I realized they had a message within them. And I started with my first book, and went on now to a series of what are 4 books, one to be published next year. To do the research was probably, the most rewarding piece of it, because not only did I have the words that were contemporary words to that moment from all these people of what was happening to them. Some had been trapped behind in the Czech lands under the Nazi occupation. Some of them perished, I discovered in all my research. Some of them had escaped to countries like Great Britain or France or Ecuador or China, like my father did. So you were getting the real-time story at that point. So I was learning, going to places. I went to Europe several times to do research to better understand what the setting was like, to see the places, to feel what those people had likely felt. And, it was a lot of information kind of pouring in at the same time, and I realized quickly that I needed experts in different areas. So for my research, I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting the wrong answer to the right questions, basically, and so I engaged people that were experts in World War II history, in Jewish history and culture, in the Holocaust, in China history, even the U.S. and South America, because I needed to understand each place. And when I would boil down kind of a storyline about what the people were telling me and what it meant in relevance for today, I needed to make sure I wasn't, synthesizing it to the point where it didn't really come with the true point and answer that really experts could tell me. So that was a rewarding piece of it, because I learned so much along the way, and I realized what we're not taught in high school, we're not taught in college. You don't learn a lot of the facts that really weigh in, and when you look at the history that's unfolding today, you realize how important it is to understand each element and where people come from. At the beginning, it started out very emotional for me, because the first letter that I had translated turned out to be the last letter that my grandfather wrote my father 3 days before he and my grandmother were taken away to a death camp, ultimately. And it was the way I met my grandfather, basically. And he was an amazing man. He made a very altruistic wish to my father, which is kind of the cornerstone of my second book, My Dear Boy. And so it was immediately very emotional for me. And many times, my husband will tell you the story that he would come upstairs to my writing room, where I'd write from early in the morning to late at night at the beginning. And a lot of it was the research I was doing and such. But I was deep into the Holocaust, trying to understand, and you can't understand the Holocaust. And, just various elements that were very emotional to go through. And I realized what my father had endured. So I didn't really know that growing up, because he hid a lot of that information, and he was a very happy person with a very good outlook of life and all these things. I knew a little bit of what had happened. I certainly knew my grandparents had perished, and I knew that he'd lost other relatives, which turned out to be 44 relatives. And so I knew there was great pain there, but I was able to really feel it. And when I read what he went through in China in his letters, it was a war-torn country at the time. The Japanese were fighting with the Chinese, both the nationalists and the communists, and they were very ruthless. And my dad was right in the middle of that, working as at a hospital, an American Brethren hospital, way in the interior of China. He was a doctor, and so he described it very vividly in his letters. So it was emotional all the way, but it was also a wonderful gift, because it's the gift of understanding, and it also taught me that there were many things that are relevant for today, whether you're talking about refugees or immigrants or human rights and human dignity and the importance of protecting that. I was learning that, and I understand, and I have great hope. And I saw that my father, took displacement, which is very uncomfortable for anybody, and he took that change and he turned it into something good and lived a good life, a lot based on the wish, really, that his father had made for him in that first letter I read, and I observed that life. So, yes, it was emotional, but it needed to be.